being part of that natural world is exactly what I crave. And so that's why I keep going back to it. And again, doing a backpack day trip or whatever, even overnight, just doesn't quite bury you as deep in that moment.
Welcome to the Beyond Listening podcast. I'm Adam, and here with Miriam. We're from We Are Open Circle, and we are super excited about having Joel Strimling. Am I pronouncing that right? I've never said your last name before.
That's all right. Yes.
From Backcountry Hunters and Anglers of the Oregon chapter, and Joel is the communications director for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers of Oregon, and has spent a lifetime outdoors in the wilderness. What I read today was that mostly as an angler, and then as a proud adult onset hunter. And Joel is an advocate for hunters and anglers around the state, and is going to talk to us today about what that means for all of us, for those of us that do access that resource of public lands in particular, for hunting and angling, for food, for subsistence, but also what that means for those of us that don't hunt or fish, what that means for what we all get to enjoy in the wilderness areas of the United States, and in particular Oregon. But we're going to look at Oregon as an example of what that means for the rest of the United States. So thank you, Joel. Sorry if I got anything wrong there. You can correct me as we go through.
No, you did great, and I appreciate the introduction. And just for brevity, we usually use BHA because that's a mouthful to say Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. So if that helps, just BHA works. And you may have already heard my dog go running by. So I, like many, got a pandemic pup. So if you hear a whine or a bark, I apologize in advance. But she can be a handful, especially when I'm not paying attention to her.
So we're actually here with Joel and Lady Hawk.
Yes, that's her name. Yeah,
Joel's
5-month-old
pandemic puppy. So Joel, let's start with your story. If how you got into this line of work, and then tell us your story, the origin story, and the path that's taken you on.
The origin story. That sounds so like it should be some sort of dramatic music. So I am a volunteer. Most of the chapter, board members are volunteers. We do this because we love it and we want to expand the opportunities for everyone in the outdoors, be that hunters, anglers, and just recreators. But going further back, my origin story, air quotes. I grew up in a very outdoorsy family. Ironically, my dad was not an outdoorsy guy. He was from the big city, the windy city of Chicago, but didn't want to raise kids in a big city and moved us to a little town in Oregon called Eugene, Oregon. And I grew up there, just sort of running around and being, having fun with him. But we didn't hunt. I didn't come from a hunting background, and just basically fished and clammed and crabbed and just enjoyed the outdoors in that sense. But my dad always instilled in me a real drive to understand my environment and just the world around me. Really exposed me to different cultures, different ways of thought. Because as he said, if you don't understand it, then you don't really aren't able really to make comments on it and interact with it. And so as I got older, fishing wise, and this may sound negative, it's not meant that way. I would fish a lot and I would bring fish to people and they would always say, "Isn't this amazing? You get all this free fish." And I would sort of laugh and go, "If you think this is free," with the amount of man hours and time and license and knowledge and tying flies and equipment, it would be the most expensive fish you could ever eat, including if you looked at the state, sort of regulating these species and making sure that they're around for us, then it's really truly an amazing story. But as I got older, and I would eat other foods that people I maybe hunted, birds and things like that, I started thinking, well, hey, I'm sort of perpetuating the isn't this great that you just get this and I get to eat it. And most people don't think that way. If someone is giving you a piece of food, it's because they want to share and they are excited for it. But at the same time, I just felt like I needed to have a better connection to that part of the world and to understand my food better and see if I could even do it. When I started, I didn't know. I thought I might try and go shoot something and just feel terrible and just be like, nope, uh-uh. And that's I was okay with that. I made peace with that. I said to myself, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. But at least I'll understand it, and I'll have a better appreciation of the food that I eat, even if I'm purchasing it. However, I obtain my food. Um, so I started with birds and turkeys, actually, because there's a lot of them in Oregon, and found that actually I not only could do it, but I quite enjoyed it, and really liked the food. The flavor to me was much more intense than a store bought um, meat. And in part, I think hunters often say that it tastes so much better. I think part of it is because we took process in it. I think some of it's psychosomatic, probably, but that doesn't lessen it, right? And so I started sharing that with friends, and did just bird hunting for about 5 years, and then decided, okay, um, I'm going to have to step up my game, pun intended, and try for big game animals and see what that's like, because that's a whole nother level of hunting. And was really fortunate to meet someone who became my mentor at my work, of all places. Otherwise, it would have been a much more difficult, learning curve. And yeah, went out, and my first season ended up harvesting a deer, and it was able to process it and carry it out of the field, and made many, many mistakes that I'm happy to go down, but they're probably not germane to this conversation necessarily. But still managed to be successful despite all my many mistakes, and just thought it was exceptional. And again, having my own food, and now owning like a chest freezer in my garage, and it's like, oh, I'm one of those guys. Really kind of changed my perspective again on my place in the world, as well as just interactions with others who have lifestyles that maybe I wasn't exposed to growing up in a little what's considered hippie town in the middle of Oregon. That's super liberal, a college town. The Grateful Dead used to come there every summer. I mean, so yeah, it really was a beneficial exposure, both in the sense of culture, thought, and eating. And that's, I guess, my origin story. And I've been sort of hunting ever since. And now I hunt multiple states and just about every species I can think of. And yeah, I absolutely love it. I don't expect I'll ever stop.
I know we could go down some of the rabbit holes of what do you do once you actually harvest a deer,
Oh,
or how do you get those licenses? And Miriam was saying, I think I might try it, going hunting in another state. Someone's gonna, and I said, well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to go into that before you do. But that's
logistics.
probably a
Yeah.
different podcast.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll go for
Well,
another one. I
Miriam,
know we did a course
send me an email,
over
Miriam.
a
I'm happy to
month or so.
dive down those rabbit holes with you, because, like I said, I actually do that quite a bit. I'm actually also a hunter education instructor for the state. I wanted to give back, and that's also in part why I joined, Oregon BHA. Is that again, my father instilled in me a willingness to help conserve and preserve and give back to the things that I take so much from, and so that's why I do all that as well.
So I heard you say you're understanding your place in the world. That the experience of harvesting wild food, big game, small game, helped you understand your place in the world, and that was sort of a foundational um, um, journey for you in terms of how your father, the values that your father instilled in you. And I'm thinking about the people that are listening to this that have not been exposed at all, or if they've been exposed to hunting, it's been through the sort of Bambi Disney version of what it is to be a hunter. Um, I wonder what you learned, to share with those folks, or those, just in relating to other people that are harvesting wild foods. Your own experience of what did you learn about your place in the world, and why might it be important for others to get an experience of that?
Well, that's it. I mean, It's a great question, but also a very involved one, of course. And I'll try and, for the sake of not spending 5 hours on a microphone, be brief. Yeah, and again, to really kind of pinpoint this, I didn't grow up in a hunting family. My father still doesn't hunt. No one else in my family does. I think they still think it's a little unusual that I do. I was the much more quiet, reserved, kind of shy kid growing up. So for me to be now running around in the woods with a high caliber rifle to them is like, what? I own a truck and a dog and all of the accoutrements that one might expect. But yeah, you know, it's a very personal thing, understanding one's place, right? I mean, I think everyone looks at that differently, and their environments are all different where you live, right? I'm very fortunate that I live, in my opinion, that I live in the Pacific Northwest, where there is a lot of opportunity for this versus, New York City. Just as an example, although I hear there's actually some good hunting in that state, but I wouldn't know how to even get started. And so, um, the environment I grew up in always has had a lot of wilderness, certainly. But yes, you mentioned kind of the Bambi ethic or the Bambiization, or I call it the Disneyfication. Maybe that's not something that you'll keep in the podcast. We don't know, for patent pending or rather for their
We
their
will.
their logo.
We'll keep it.
But yeah, the Disneyfication of animals, the personification maybe is probably a better way to put it. And I certainly grew up with that. I mean, I think as a kid, I probably watched Bambi and cried and all of these things. And so that is definitely why I had a lot of self doubt getting started in it. But what I found was that the the opportunity to challenge myself and to both emotionally and physically, quite honestly, you know, was a real driving factor. I still remember the first deer I shot. I was terrified when I did it and sad and you know very kind of freaked out, for lack of a better word. I was like, oh my gosh, I've just done this thing. Like, here it is. This is it. There's a finality to it. One of the things I often tell people is that who ask me why I like to hunt so much is they said it's not about the harvesting of an animal. That's actually the extra. I like going hunting as much as I like the meat and the ability to have all this amazing food. I just like being off in the woods in places other people don't go and seeing things that other people don't see. One year I was in Idaho and a moose licked my truck. I mean, that's just what you don't hear about these things, and people say, how the heck did that happen? And I don't know. I just happened to be so far away from everyone else that she was not worried, and I wasn't in the truck at the time, but still. So yeah, it really allowed me to expose myself to a larger natural world that we all read about, we see on TV, whether we're watching various nature shows, but actually interacting with that and honestly becoming part of it, really becoming part of it, right? Versus just watching it. So, nothing against those that maybe go to a zoo or even Yellowstone Park. Awesome. If that's the ability and the opportunity you have, then you should maximize that, in my opinion. But I had the opportunity to, on a much more personal level, interact with that wildness. And once I did, I mean, it was just like, okay, I don't want to stop doing this. It just sort of opened up my heart and my mind, and again, made me want to challenge myself more. This year, I'm planning a solo, probably 7 to 10 day high elevation backcountry hike in hunt where it's going to be, I got a super light tent and everything and all the things you might see on YouTube. And I'm like, okay, here we go. This will be a real challenge. Now, obviously, I have all the logistics planned out just in case. Now that I've done this a bit, I can understand that better. But that that ability to immerse myself and no longer be in an area of comfort, for lack of a better term, again, mentally and physically, right? Um, Somehow I find really engaging. And I don't know that I can wholly vocalize why, because some people would just simply say that sounds terrible. Like, how could you not take a shower for 10 days? And don't get me wrong, that's not, I don't enjoy not taking a shower or not having some of my finer things for 10 days, and drinking dehydrated coffee and eating dehydrated meals is not enjoyable. You are, you are managing it and you are pushing through it, despite the challenges. And somehow that is even more rewarding than just having an individualized task, a race to run, a thing to build, a paper to write. So it's kind of my rambling way, probably, of answering your question. I'm not sure I actually even did, but
All right, so we are back with Joel. We had an internet service provider go down for a long time, and so we're picking up a day later. If you're listening to this, and we've had a lot of time to reflect on the things that we were talking about, reflect on internet connectivity and what the inconveniences, the unexpected inconveniences of our daily life, which really coincides right where we left off with um, with kind of planned inconveniences, planned uh, hardship, planned challenges, and you were talking, Joel, about the like what you get from that. Um, is there anything that we missed that you want to that you've been reflecting on that you want to
well, I
bring
mean,
into the
you and I,
picture here?
yeah. Well, first off, obviously, sorry about that. That was my ISP that went down, and yeah, it was interesting because you and I, of course, were chatting about this offline. At which, it's like, gosh, I wish we could be recording this. That there's a, I was saying in my previously that I wasn't sure I could express why or how that was so beneficial, these inconveniences of going off in the woods and disconnecting. And I had two real kind of clarifying moments yesterday that really were just like sort of little light bulbs, because here I am without any ISP. I guess I had some time to reflect. Was, first, that a good friend of mine who I go, and actually was my original mentor, who I go backcountry hunting with, we often go on these trips, maybe once every 2 or 3 years, where we will be packed in by horse and dropped off way deep in the wilderness for up to 14 days. And he made a really good comment, and I won't be able to say it perfectly, but paraphrasing it, essentially, one time I remember this, he said, we do this not only because we get to, we get to go do these things because we enjoy them. He's like, but and we get to disconnect. He's like, but in fact, we're actually forced to out here. And that's why he likes it so much. There's not even the option to turn on your phone and connect with someone. It just simply, there's no internet. There's not even barely a radio station out there. If you had a giant antenna, you might pick up, and we will take a radio occasionally just for some comfort, so to speak, next to a campfire. But most of the time, you're just out there. And I was mentioning that I'm going to be doing a solo trip, and that's going to be really interesting because I'll be really watching my weight. So I'm not taking any of those kind of conveniences, like a radio, etc. So the nights, I guess I'll be singing to myself and, getting to see the stars. But um, I think that really reflects on a stoicism, like you and I were talking about. And I apologize, my dog is right below me whining for my attention, so I'm sure you can hear her. So, as we chatted about yesterday, I have a pup. But it really
That's
reflects
nature.
on,
Nature's always intervening.
right, exactly. But it really reflects on that stoicism, like you and I were chatting about, that um, the idea that you get to not only just endure these hardships, but somehow are improved by them, and that day to day hardships are not enjoyable. ISP goes down, truck breaks down. You're like, man, it's going to cost me a bunch of money. Those are not enjoyable types of things. And maybe Stoics way back in the day, and the Greeks weren't thinking that way, of course, because they didn't have to have quite the same thing. And I'm not trying to romanticize a prior lifestyle. I'm not. I love technology. I love having all my stuff around me and being able to do podcasts like this. So I also, I sort of abhor the idea that life was better in the past. I don't agree. When people say that, oh, 100 years ago, I'm like, yeah, you didn't even have a toilet. So no, that's not better. But it is an interesting point that we, we as a society, it seems like, or at least maybe it's even the privileged class, I don't know, um, we root for the underdog, right? We like to see someone strive against something, be that a sport, be that even a story on the news about someone who overcame something, or a movie. We love to see that sort of rising up and succeeding in the face of adversity. That stoicism is somehow innately a part of all of us, and so hunting for me is very much part of that stoic kind of ethic. And in fact, as I mentioned to you, I have a quote from Marcus Aurelius that I love. That it's one of my favorite quotes, and it just sort of popped in my head. And it says, "No matter what anyone says or does, my task is to be good, like gold or emerald or purple, repeating it to itself. No matter what anyone says or does, my task is to be emerald, my color undiminished." And it's the second part of that, the quotes, where the color is speaking to itself, that really, kind of lights into me, is that says, I want my color to be undiminished. Emerald is vibrant. I think any of us sees an emerald, wow, that's vibrant. It's a fact. And so to have a vibrant life in the face of that adversity, to know that every day I'm going to try and hold that vibrancy, and appreciate that, and appreciate this world around me. I think that being out there in those challenging places really helps me to do that, whether I'm a successful hunter or not. I think that that vibrancy and that experience affects me, and in my opinion, in a positive way. So it's an interesting thought.
Um, Over the weekend, I had the privilege of being with a group of women, and one of the women there was describing. She grew up on the land. She's an Indigenous woman who grew up on the land, and she was describing how difficult it was for her. She's now in the Bay Area, to have gone from that and to continue to go back from that, in that immersion, into life in the Bay. Basically, it was like a banging up inside of her. And I kind of started wondering about that with you, because I'm hearing like the immersion into this other way of almost being when you're in the hunting, when you get into the hunting, and how that feels when you come back into your home and into another way of living, and how they've influenced each other, how they influence each other, I guess, and what that's like for you.
That's amazing that you bring that up, because it instantly just pops ideas into my head. And it reminds me of my very first, what I would consider real pack-in backcountry hunt, which I actually did guided, because I just knew, I was like, no, I don't have the knowledge to be out here by myself. And there's challenging oneself, and then there's just misery for a week to 10 days by oneself. And so I said, all right, I'm gonna manage this, and do a guided trip. But same thing, we went into the backcountry on horseback, with a couple mules, and camped in tents, for, I think it was 7 or 8 days. And there was one other person with us, and it was really interesting, because I didn't expect this. I'll be honest. Like, again, something new. It's going to not experience this, not growing up this way. Again, being totally disconnected. And sure, I've done that for a couple days, but for a full week, and sort of living this kind of really, for lack of a better term, maybe Western lifestyle, if you're thinking of Old West. um, and then when we got done, and I drove into the first town, I remember going into the store, and I had seen only two people for 8 days on a daily basis, and then a lot of wild animals and no other noises. Like at night, it's a cacophony of wilderness in the weird quiet, right? There's bugs and quiet, and you swear you can hear a blade of grass moving from a mouse underneath your cot. And I went into this store, and it's the waft of air conditioning hits you. And I think it was like Britney Spears or something was playing over the speakers. And there was just all these people, because this was pre-pandemic. And I literally was just like taken aback. In some ways, probably how some people feel now going back into a store after the pandemic. It was like too much, too much, too much. I was like very sort of like thrown in the deep end of a social, kind of interaction that I wasn't necessarily ready for. But I also do remember going to the nearest kind of restaurant bar and getting a beer and a burger and having a toilet and thinking, this is the greatest thing in the history of things. Like, oh yes, thank you. Because out there in the backcountry, there's no such thing as a toilet. So, um, yeah, it there's definitely a reimmersion. I was going to say issue. I don't know if that's the right process. And the more I do it, the less I experience that, which is somewhat unfortunate. Because that is sort of exciting and fun to feel that. But it also, you get used to it. You start to go, okay, I've done this. Your brain recognizes the re-engagement, and so it becomes easier for your brain to make that transition as you do it more and more. And so now it's not as extreme, although again, on this hunt I'm going to be doing, it will be interesting to see how that feels.
And do you feel like it's like having experienced that different way of being? Do you feel like it's opened up a different perception or understanding or a different way of, you know, in your day-to-day life?
I think so. I mean, that's hard to vocalize, right? I mean, or maybe I just hope it does, right? I mean, that's part of it. Part of the reason I do this is because I hope it makes me a better person, right? Because I don't need to do this. There's no qualifying reason to do this. There's plenty of other things I could do to put myself through some sort of hardship or to challenge myself. And in fact, I was a kayak and canoe racer for years, before I even started hunting. Did races all over the Pacific and in Hawaii and places like that. So, but yeah, I think that when I come back from these trips, like when I'm re-engaging with coworkers and family and friends, I feel like, from my perspective, that I am heartened to see them and excited to share in the even just a glimpse of the babes, shush. I know you're on the bench right behind me. I wish you could see her. It's rather cute, but that's what she's trying to do, is cue herself into attention. Um, so yeah, I feel like it makes me want to share at least a glimpse into that world, right? And I think that's a very powerful and social thing that we do as well as people is want to share these experiences with each other, whatever they might be, right? I mean, um, but I do try and remember not everyone is as engaged, right? It's sort of like someone telling you, you got to read this book. And you're like, I have zero interest. No, you got to read it. It changed my life. And you're like, yeah, I literally could care less. Like I'm not reading that book. So I do try and tread lightly. I don't launch into big diatribes about it. In fact, quick tangent, a side note is that it's amusing to me that when people get very excited about the fact that I do hunt, often they will introduce me. This is my friend Joel, who I know, and oh my gosh, he's this amazing hunter who went out and shot an animal. And I'm like, whoa, let's not start with that because that's not all I am. But I know that they are excited by that, and so I value that. But at the same time, I just don't want, again, that you got to read this book. It's the old joke of, and it's picking on a group, which I shouldn't, but it's the old joke of how do you know a group of CrossFitters? Because the first thing they say is, "Hi, my name's Dave. I'm a CrossFitter." Um, so it's again that kind of don't tread lightly, but yes, also share and expose. So yeah, very roundabout way of just answering your question. Sorry.
I think one of the reasons we wanted to get your voice and your story out there is because there tends to be a big divide, like within from the urban populations and more rural populations in the United States. I mean, it shows up everywhere, and some people say it's the urban rural divide. There's many other divisions, of course, that we could look at, but hunting, fire a relationship with firearms, is very very different in generally in the urban areas than in rural areas. And so when you talk about um, being introduced as a hunter or sharing your stories, and I also know this is connected with your work, which is recruiting new hunters, and I know there's three R's. I can't remember them.
Yep. I'll go
Retaining
over those in a
probably.
second. Yep, it's in there. Yep.
Yeah, there is a bit of an educational process and a bit of I imagine a cultural bridging that needs to happen. And I'm wondering how you navigate that and um, how you hold that for yourself too, both in your role on the board of BHA and as someone who's just super passionate about this.
Yeah, and you bring up again an awesome point, and there's a lot of nuances in there, like you mentioned, with kind of divides of socio political, economical, and other factors. But yes, first off, R3 is retain, recruit, and reactivate. Just for anyone listening, and that has become a real big buzzword. And in some ways, I don't like that has become such a meaningful expression. Um, because it also causes people to sort of rail against it, and what's the point of all these things, and what are you trying to do when for example, in some areas hunting is seeing a massive decline in the number of hunters. People age out, or there's less land to hunt on, things like that. But kind of the unknown secret is that in a number of states like Oregon, the hunting numbers over the last probably 5 to 10 years have stayed relatively flat. So we aren't really losing out on hunters per se. What we're losing out on is hunters per capita, right? And so again, we become, shouldn't say we, I don't want to self-identify with the necessarily, but hunters in general become more in the minority when it comes to trying to explain why they do what they do. And so anything that becomes outside that, um, hey, no barking. Sorry about that. Um, so yeah, when you're standing outside the norm, obviously it becomes more difficult to try and clarify your point and show why there's potentially benefit to it. So I look at R3 personally as even just engaging the public to make them understand the benefits of hunting, even just the food. So what they call venison diplomacy is a very common word as well, and I engage in that frequently, not only because I want people to understand why I do what I do, but I really do like seeing people get excited by, the food and some sort of gourmet recipe, and just like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing I've ever eaten. And that's very engaging for me. And then also though, anyone who has an interest in understanding their environment, which I have shown a number of people how to hunt, or at least sort of guided them. I shouldn't say show. Um, you know, Anyone who has an interest in hunting or their natural world, fishing, any of it, foraging, I'm happy to kind of try and provide any resource I can, especially as an adult. And this is one thing I've said to many groups, is that families that hunt probably will keep hunting. If you're growing up in a hunting family and you're going to go hunt with your dad, you're going to go hunt with your dad, regardless of any enough, regardless of any sort of input from me or any hunter education or any state regulations. You're in a hunting family, you're ingrained. And if you aren't, though, if you're an adult like me, the learning curve is super steep, right? Like, where do you even get started? And if you go online, I mean, quite honestly, we all know online is not always the kindest place. People can get fairly vociferous and kind of ugly out there. So yeah, a lot of people shy away from that, and maybe they don't have a good experience from that. And so then they just think, I don't want to do this. I don't like it. It's not relevant in today's society. It should just go away. And I don't agree with that, again, because I think that there is like I mentioned, even if it is on a stoic level, there's value in it, beyond the fact that I think that there is a component in human nature that says we still get excited by this chase atmosphere. That's still wired in us. Whether that will eventually go away or not, I don't know, through evolution. But that's still, we still like the violent sport. Let's be realistic. I mean, I love football, but I also have a love-hate relationship with it when I see people colliding into each other at 20 miles an hour without a car. So I just want people to rectify their natural world around them, and to have thought about it, to have actually given it a conscious decision as to what they want to take from their area and from their world, and also recognize that we do take, right? We are taking from everything around us all the time. Yeah, we give back, but ultimately, I think we all know as the population grows, we're taking more than we give back. And so, yeah, this idea of recruiting and and engaging becomes then very powerful when you can take someone out and have them find their own mushrooms or shoot a bird or catch a fish. And some people will never do it again. I've had friends who are like, okay, I did it. That was amazing. I don't ever want to do that. I know I can. That's awesome. But then I've had other friends who are the most, what you would consider city slicker kind of person, like, jazz musician-y kind of hipster, whatever you want to label them. And they love it. They are now all in, and you wouldn't recognize them in the sense of the stereotype of hunting. I have a friend who runs a winery, and he is an avid turkey and squirrel hunter, and I mean like has a squirrel call, which even I was like, "What is a squirrel call?" And to see him use that thing is like a musical instrument, and but he likes doing it in a very different way. Like he's very into kind of proper hunting. So he ordered all this kit and clothing from England and dresses up like in a shooting jacket and has the welly boots and has a little dog with him and has a break action shotgun and has a lovely walk through the woods chasing turkeys and squirrels. And it's brilliant. And he makes amazing dishes out of it. And so is that what people think of when you say hunter? Probably not. But he is an exceptional hunter and he's gotten quite good at it. And I applaud him for wanting to fully do it, not to dip a toe. To can I do this? Yes, okay, I can. Do I like this? And to be frank, the first time we went out, I mean, I thought he'd probably never do this again. It worked out where he ended up taking a turkey home, but it was a tough experience for him. He'd never done anything like that, killing an animal, dressing it, all that, and you could tell it was jarring. And so I kind of had the thought, yeah, he'll probably not do that again. And then next thing I knew, he was so far down the rabbit hole. I was like, wow, all right, cool. Sorry. So there's my rambling couple of stories though on how I think R3 not only engages with others, but also for myself. And again, I just always want to provide a conduit to opportunity and to again to that self exposure, whatever that is. I mean, I used to take people on
Mhm.
racing kayaks and stuff too if they wanted to. Again, it's all about that exposure. So
So I'm hearing about the connection between people. You know,
yes,
you're connecting with creating community. Certainly, there's community around this, and it's not, in my experience, it's not just like let's get out there and shoot something. It's a community that there's a whole culture and a meaningful culture around it. Mentorship, um, family, family traditions, even traditions like cultural traditions that are being picked up again that might have been lost or are across continents. Um, my experience of of any kind of interaction, hunting and gathering, um, interaction with the wilderness, as opposed to like just hiking or doing something that's just kind of less interactive, is also that the heightened sense that we get, both the way that we listen, the way that we see, the way that we have to learn about all the intricacies of a species, what they eat, what their tracks, their poop, all these things that I think I don't know. I don't know if anybody, I certainly couldn't get it myself, can learn that from a book or learn that just by walking through the woods. I think there's some people who are extraordinarily kind of brilliant in that way, and they can learn all the plant names and learn about species that way. But when you're interacting with a species in that way, there's a connection that is, um, yeah, that just goes so far beyond, and it leads to wanting to. I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but it leads most people to want to protect those things, protect the
yeah,
salmon, protect the steelhead,
yeah,
protect the population of elk, etc. In a
absolutely.
way
I
that's
mean,
probably harder to make. It's more abstract if you're just learning about it from a book or something, right? Or as a
yeah,
hiker.
absolutely. I mean, you look at hunters, and it is hard to justify. Hunters are taking, but hunters are also some of the heaviest conservation, you know, persons around. They do more for conservation than many people do, and you know, not trying to point a finger, you know, an accusing finger at people, but you know, being able to say, you know, like when someone says like, "Oh, hunters just go out and kill things," it's like, well, when was the last time that you did something for an elk or a deer? Do you give to some sort of foundation that supports elk or deer? No. Have you gone out and put up wildlife friendly fencing and torn down old fencing? Have you, you know, removed invasive juniper forests? There's expanding juniper forests in Oregon that are slowly expanding and eroding habitat for animals, choking out the fauna and forage that they eat and hide in. So, I mean, all of these things that people who care about these animals, even though yes, they pursue them and kill them, do to protect them and give back. You know, and you look at animals like pronghorn antelope. Most people know them as antelope. You know, we're very down in numbers, and now in Wyoming, there's nearly as many pronghorn as there are people. So there's something like 5 or 6 million pronghorn in the state of Wyoming. Um, you know, and you know, or you look at white-tailed deer; they were very suppressed, even in the East Coast. And now, of course, you look at the East Coast, and people go like, "Oh my God, they're everywhere! They are a nuisance." And that's because again, people stepped up and said, "Hey, we need to do something to protect these animals." But I do want to actually kind of dovetail back. You were mentioning something about kind of that interaction and saying like going on a hike and observing. And I will say, yeah, it is interesting. There is a difference there, at least for me, Adam, because people say, well, couldn't you just go out and go hiking and take photos? And I'm like, it's not the same for me. You know, I go places and do things I wouldn't do if I were going on a hike. I don't know necessarily why. Maybe because it is I'm pursuing something, and so there's a that prey drive aspect, and I'm going off trail or off piste, and I'm trying to interact and trying to be so a part of nature that I am literally part of it again. When I used to fly fish, I used to say why I liked to fly fish so much was that I was so a part of nature, I was fooling nature itself. Because you know the fish comes up because it can't help it. It literally goes, you know, millions of years of instinct say that that is exactly what I want. And so being that a part of something is really quite incredible, right? I mean, we all kind of strive to be part of our community, part of each other's lives, whatever that might be. And so to be a part of the natural world like that is impressive. And it was it last year or the year before? I was hunting northern Idaho, and I actually came across grizzly tracks and grizzly scat. I was definitely a bit worried. I was concerned. I was confused. I was, you know, kind of like I started like I did have a GPS that I can text with. I texted a friend. I said, "Here's my marker. I'm going to send you a marker every 20 minutes. You know, if suddenly I stop sending you markers, you might want to start sending me a text, and I'll text you when I get out." And I told him why, and he said, "Yeah, that's probably a good idea." And I was, but yeah, I mean, when you see, you know, scat that's probably only a couple days old, you know, obviously not super old, and a footprint the size of, oh my gosh, you know, a pie plate, you're just suddenly going, oh my, I am definitely in it. You know, I'm completely in it. And there's, you know, this is this, but again, I wouldn't not do it. Like I'm going to go back there. I'm going to hunt that same area because being a part of that and feeling that quickening of the pulse and the chicken skin with the hair raising up, all of that is incredibly engaging and incredibly driving. And again, I obviously want to be safe, and I carry bear spray, and I don't want to have an issue. But at the same time, again, being part of that natural world is exactly what I crave, and so that's why I keep going back to it. And again, doing a backpack day trip or whatever, even overnight, just doesn't quite bury you as deep um, in that moment. I guess is what I would say. And again, apologies for
I had a
Lady Hawk,
friend who
but
said it's okay. It's kind of exactly what we're talking about. Like in so many, the interactions, the unexpected, and the more than human. I had a friend who used to say like, you know, just to really invite. He was a mentor in guiding, and he said, imagine if we were walking through this landscape of California before we had killed off the grizzly bears. before the Californians in the early 20th century had eliminated them. How would we be thinking about where we're walking, the sounds
Oh
that we hear, just the heightened awareness of knowing that we're not the top of the food chain.
yeah,
And I think it was really it made me think about how how comfortable we are. We've made the landscape so comfortable for ourselves that we live in, and how it actually has dulled our senses in so many ways that we try to heighten in through artificiality, through constant social media or violent films or whatever it is that we're doing as a society, politics even, to
yeah.
find that heightened awareness. Um, I want to get to Miriam. Do you have any questions? Do you have a question before I want to move us towards conservation and some of the numbers, and start to paint a picture for those that might still be doubting that hunting is contributing more than it's taking.
Right.
But I want to just make sure that we're complete here.
Yeah, I think I just as I was listening, I was remembering when Adam and I started to fly fish. I was showing you the hat I was wearing. I'm going to put it on just in case.
Yeah.
I'm going to put on my fly fishing hat. So this hat is what we bought to commemorate our first fly fishing, you know, expedition, and it then kind of characterized that when we would do a program, we'd go out and fly fish. And I didn't quite know what to expect. I'd fished before, but fly fishing was very particular because and it was suddenly it was that observation. You had to look at how all the different elements work together in a way that wouldn't happen when I was hiking or overnight backpacking, except when I got lost.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when
I've
I
been
got
lost.
lost, then
Yeah.
suddenly when
Yeah.
I was lost, then I had to like, and so there's this thing
Yep.
of like, I think this is where, it's that survival mechanism that I hear you talking about. There's something in there's sorry, just wait one sec. There's something in what you're saying, that it's that by that survival mechanism, not only is exciting, I hear the excitement, like that feeling of aliveness, but I wonder about that survival mechanism because when you think about the comforts, you're describing the toilet and the meat that's you can just buy off a supermarket shelf, or I'm wondering what you think about that survival mechanism, like having that kind of triggered in you, what that means in terms of us and living on this earth. And yeah, I'm wondering what insights you have around that.
Well, I think that's a huge point, Miriam. I mean, first off, because I grew up fly fishing first, and that's what my first love was, and I did it all over the Northwest, and I used to like get off of work and like I had a motorcycle at the time. I would pack it like an army duffel bag with my float tube and ride an hour to the nearest lake, pump it up, and only fish for an hour because I just so wanted to be on the water. But um, and I still when I'm fishing like for steelhead in the river, I often will like sort of rest my hand just on the surface of the water. I know it's kind of silly sounding, but it's like I'm getting the pulse of the river, and there is a connection that way, like you were mentioning, and we have sort of. I don't want this to sound bad. I'm not castigating a modernized, privileged society, but we have sort of muted uh, the cycle of life, right? We muted this need to kill something. We've muted death. When do we see it other than in movies or on the news when it's something horrible and then it's horrible? But we don't see that or we don't think about it when we are with our friends or on our own or even at a restaurant, right? We don't think about this is going on right now all around us, even on very microscopic levels, right? So we've sort of muted that attention to those details, to that racing of the pulse, and that, as Adam put it, looking at every little thing, every leaf. Is this leaf broken? What broke that leaf? Which direction is that facing? All these things are sort of have been kind of pushed aside because we don't need them. I mean, I'm not saying that again that there's a wrong thing in doing that. It's just a difference in the way that our current modernized and urban society functions. So yeah, I think that I think that muting has really kind of
I want to.
changed. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, no. Like, I interrupted you. I thought you had paused. Sorry,
Well, I did because
but
I was
I
sort of collecting thoughts, but
like.
that's okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm really struck by that now. Just thinking, what is it like to experience death? On a regular basis. You
Right.
know.
It's, I hope I never, yeah, because I don't want to sound bad towards anyone who's been hunting their whole life, but some people have hunted their whole life, and shooting an animal to them is, they're just used to it. I suppose someone who probably works maybe in farming is that way, right? They've been around it. They haven't muted the process. So to them, this is kind of a normal thing. For me, it's still not. When I shoot an animal, and I don't know that it's a wholly conscious thing, but it's definitely a conscious thing. I put my hand on every animal that I shoot, even just for a moment, just to think. And I'm not like, trying to get all esoteric, or try and channel anything, or feel any departing energy or anything of that nature. It's just a moment. I just am taking a moment, thinking, whoa, again, this is not nothing. I just stopped this thing from its life. Now, I'm not saying that is a good or a bad thing, because, talking kind of what Adam was talking about with conservation and the ideology of hunting and how people view it, a lot of animals die really awful deaths. There's not, it's not Disney. They don't go to sleep under a tree surrounded by all their little rabbit friends. There is, uh, in some ways, an easier finality from a hunter than there might be in nature, for the animal. Um, Not to give hunting a credence in that sense, but just to kind of point that out to those who might be saying, like, oh, well, hunters just are sort of assassinating animals. Um, yeah, sorry, my dog was chewing on my hand. I sort of lost my train of thought there for a second. So, um, yeah, death is an interesting thing, because so my first deer I shot, I think I mentioned last time, if I recall. I absolutely freaked out. I ran up the road, did everything wrong. I ran up the road after the thing, because I was like, oh my gosh, this poor thing, and there's blood everywhere, and I ended up with blood on me. I scoped myself with my rifle when I shot it, so I'm bleeding, and why am I bleeding? And it's pouring rain. I'm in the middle of the woods, and I'm thinking, and I started apologizing to this animal. I was like, because I had not experienced that type of 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 death. I had seen death in the sense that I worked in nursing years before in college, as a nursing assistant, just to help make some money. So I had seen death in the sense of someone getting old and dying, but causing a death was a very different process, and it definitely, I don't know exactly how to state it. It just changes how you look at things. Now, I don't I don't regret killing any animal, but I do feel badly, certainly, that I have killed something. I'm not going to say I'm not taking joy in killing something, but I don't ever like regret in the sense of, and I've never, like, after that, said I'm so sorry. Like, I've never done that since. That was that one time, and now it's more, okay, I did this thing. And if anything, maybe it makes me take uh, life so much more seriously, right? In the sense of enjoyment of it, and understanding that this animal is now going to provide meals to my friends and family, and I got to do this amazing thing, and I got to go be part of this natural world, and I got to be, part of what we did as humans for, thousands upon thousands of years. And so I think it makes me appreciate all of that, and it ties you back to that sense of that struggle, and like we said, back to that kind of. It's weird to think that taking a life and death somehow ties you to life more, but that's, I guess, where I'm going with that, is that's what that does. It ties you to life and living
Yeah.
more. That's probably not very
Thank
well
you so
stated.
much for
But
sharing that. Well, no, thank you so much for sharing that. For someone who hasn't killed an animal in that way before, it really gives an insight, and it strikes me, how in the way you told that story, how it also the way that it brings you alive, and you were talking about the relationship with the modern world, and how there is so much depression and anxiety. And just from hearing you talk, it's like that comes from that disconnection from that cycle, which you're talking about, I think, just
Yeah.
from what you've said. But thank you so much for sharing that. That's a
Yeah.
whole nother insight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I almost hesitate to leave the territory of kind of meaning and feeling
It's yeah. It's a
in this, because it's such an important thing to communicate in a way to kind of bring the humanity back into this, and bigger, that not even humanity in the
well.
context of our place on planet Earth
I think you're right there
for all
calling it
all
that.
time.
Yeah, because I mean, quick tangent and dovetail on that. Just what you said right there, Adam, is that one thing often people will say is like, well, I don't like hunters, but I like you, Joel, because you're an ethical hunter and you go out and you do all these things and you do all this. And I'm like, how do you know other people aren't? And the again the muting of understanding or not seeing the whole picture, right? I mean, if they see like a picture on social media, it might just be someone over a dead animal. And look, there's absolutely there's absolutely joy when you are successful. I'm not gonna lie, you are excited, you are joyful, your heart is racing, and yeah, there's hugs and high fives. And so if someone sees that, they might look at that as, oh my god, look at these horrible people, they're celebrating the death of something. And it's really celebrating life and that struggle. So that's where I think that both of your conversations kind of connect together. Hey, that's enough of that.
It was, I think it was in Steve Rinella's book about buffalo. He said something
Mhm.
like, I think it was in that book. He said something like, "I can totally understand a really uh, disciplined vegan having a problem with hunting, but if you eat any animal products, you have no right to talk
Yeah.
about the ethics of hunting when there's just because of that disconnect, right? Like
Yeah.
you're still participating. We're consuming death. We're even in agriculture, there's a lot of killing of
Us
animals,
being alive on a
that the
daily
plants have
basis
feelings.
is causing
Um,
death. Development of
us,
cities,
but
driving
yeah,
cars. Let's be realistic. Everything we do deals in life and death. And again, we ignore
yeah,
it or we have muted it. So
and the connection, like actually participating in it, makes us ask the questions,
yeah, that's
right?
actually an incredible
What does
point.
this mean? How am I? How am I participating in the conservation or the giving back, the reciprocity
How did you just state all that so much better than the
that
last
also exists for
hour of
humans?
me meandering on like that? I see there. Just take that, and make that the
I
podcast. That
I
10 seconds right there.
I'm a better listener than talker. I'm just listening to you and and feeling the fullness of what you're sharing and your experience, and reflecting back little pieces of it. So you said it better. I'm just distilling it. That's our job here. Um, and also it's kind of leading me to think about that. If one of the books I recommend to people that have less connection with it, less immediate connection with the natural world, but but consider themselves conservationists or environmentalists, is Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's a book about, and I wish I had her name on the top of my head, the author, but we'll put it in the notes here. And it's about the ancient human connection, or uh, the ancient human practice of reciprocity. And what I took away from that book is humans have always been a part. We didn't just enter, we're not aliens that have arrived on this earth to extract everything from it and behave like a virus. It's just that we've forgotten how to be in a reciprocal relationship. And so we look at the forest and say, don't touch the forests. We look at the animals and say, don't touch the animals. But then we actually lose the connection with those places in a way that actually we could contribute to them. We have made those places more abundant even before the industrial revolution, even before major civilization happened, agricultural revolution. So I'm bringing this back to the present moment, to our society, and thinking about hunting, angling as primary conduits for conservation these days. And even I know a little bit about the roots of the conservation movement. I'm thinking of Theodore Roosevelt and others who were hunters and um, actually kicked off this in America, anyways. The the movement to create wilderness areas to preserve public lands, and it's directly connected with hunting. So whatever you have, whatever I know, I mentioned to you before, like come with some numbers, come with some top level information too. How do hunting and fishing um, keep public lands available to people that even don't hunt or fish? How does it contribute to the preservation of species and the rebounds that we've seen in a lot of the numbers
Yeah.
in some of the species that are also game species?
Yeah. And that's a, I mean, look, it's again, a very involved topic. And I encourage people to go online and research these things and read about Teddy Roosevelt and the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. They actually partner with BHA. I mean, many other organizations, of course, out there as well. But what's amazing to people is, look, it's a weird dichotomy. When we started seeing these animals disappearing from the environment, that was because of the point in the nation where we were settling the nation. And yeah, we were consuming, right? We're spreading out, we're consuming, we're shooting things, we're eating things because that's what we did back then. So was much of this caused by us or all of us? Yeah. I mean, these animals didn't start having issues till we suddenly were on this continent, right? Not saying that they wouldn't have had some sort of other issue, you know, but definitely humans in general have left an indelible thumbprint on the landscape, and I do mean indelible. You can't say I, I I I resist and don't like the argument that if you just let nature take back over, everything's going to be fine. No, it's not. We've seen that it doesn't work that way. It can recover a little, but it actually does take our active partnership and our active help. Um, and so when you look at these groups that sprung up, they were mostly hunters and anglers because they were the ones more connected and out there and actually saw, hey, I'm not seeing as many deer. Where have all the deer gone? Where have all the pronghorn gone? Why are there not as many ducks? What's going on here? And so they said, we need to find this out. And, with the work of biologists and other people, we figured out, okay, here's the problem. Overhunting, lack of habitat is actually much more of an issue than hunting ever has and will be. I mean, habitat still is the number one issue for animal decline. As cities grow and grow and population centers just explode, and even if they go up, people are like, well, it's just going up. Well, pollutants, damming of rivers. I mean, we've seen it, right? I mean, you can watch every special on National Geographic or whatever else and see the effects, right? There's several senators and representatives trying to breach 4 dams on the Snake River to let it flow more freely again and let more salmon and steelhead up that river because the runs are just decimated. Because back when we, as a modernized society, were developing, we didn't have the same knowledge, and we were eager and perhaps overly ready to expand and to show our diversity as a species and the fact that we can terraform and make our environment what we need it to be without necessarily always appreciating the effects on the natural world around us, right? And so Roosevelt and others would created national park systems, preserves, refuges, started creating regulations and saying, hey, first off, as hunters, we owe it to these animals because we are taking to not just blindly go through this and consume, but also that we need to engage with others and set up these wild spaces for everyone to touch it, right? Kind of like what we're talking about. Maybe not full immersion, but to go to Yellowstone Park and go, oh my gosh, there's a bison. Now, I will say, as we see on the news every year, please don't get out of the car and try and put your child on a bison for a photograph. That seems to happen every year. And the results aren't good. These are not pets. This isn't some sort of playground where these animals are humanized and tamed. These are wild animals, and in their environment, we are not high on the ladder of dominance. We are quite low. But so, yeah, the protections afforded were initially set up by hunting and angling and conservation groups. If you spring forward kind of to modern day, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, BHA, as I mentioned, I volunteer with them, and their big thing is, their primary mission, besides conservation and engagement and open doors for everyone to use the outdoors, is public land, because as well as people may or may not know, there is less and less public land in the world because we as a population grow and grow and have more people. And so, well, we have to expand. So the city expands its zoning and boundaries. So then we develop out into the country, and then the person living there moves further out, and so on and so forth. And very quickly, again, we are intruding upon animals. One of the larger crises right now is you look at mule deer, which is a subspecies of deer that some people may not be aware of. There's three major species of deer in the United States. White-tailed deer is the one everyone thinks of, and they do very well around people. Mule deer do not. They do not. They have been shown that they won't cross an old road. They'll look at that thing and just go, nope. And so now you've interrupted their migration route to follow what is known as the green wave, which is essentially their foliage and their ability to forage and eat. And so you are literally disrupting their life source and their life flow that way, just by having a BLM road to go do a survey somewhere. So everything we do has impact. It is indelible. And so we have a responsibility, in my view, to try and support these animals, not only for hunting. I mean, I would say this: if hunting ended tomorrow and said, there is no more hunting for deer in the United States, I would say, okay, that stinks, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to try and and help conserve these animals, and maybe bring back hunting at some point. Because again, I still want to have that involved experience where I am immersed in their natural world. Again, just doing a hike with them is not the same. Um, a good example of this that is rather a heated topic is the value of an animal, because in modern society we tend to put value on everything, and things that don't have value tend to not draw attention. Um, People may not realize that, I think it was, I'd have to double check this, I think it was 2019, maybe 2018. There were caribou in the continental United States. And people always say to me, what? Oh, yeah, there were caribou in northern Washington state. It was the Selkirk caribou. They are now extirpated, meaning they no longer exist. They're not gone from the environment completely. There's a few in Canada, but there were, I think, like 3 or 4, maybe 5 total left in Washington. And they actually captured them and took them to Canada to try and do a captive breeding program, with the hope that someday they will release these animals. And the main contributors to their decline was roads and predation. Predators on the rise in that area without any sort of check and balance and control. And a lot of logging roads, they would come down and lick the salt off the logging roads, get hit by big logging trucks. People say, oh, that's terrible, don't cut down the trees. Well, we all live in houses. We use wood. We do. And we're not going to stop. I'm sorry. It's a blind eye if you say, oh, we'll just stop doing this. We'll find a better way. That's not going to happen fast. That's not an overnight fix. You have to be able to show people why these things matter. And so having an assigned value does that. And as much as people don't like it, another example of this very large shift here, so I apologize and I hope people can follow, is there's a goat, I think it's in Iraq or Iran, and I would butcher the name of it. It starts with an M. It's like a Marcor or something of that nature. They used to be just sort of eliminated even by the tribes people over there, from what I understand. There's some articles, I think, on OPB that even went over this, because they got in the way of the other goats, etc. And they were just sort of in the way, and they were going to be extinct until they set up these extremely limited, regulated hunting seasons for them. And to hunt one of these costs like $120,000, $150,000, and all of that money goes back to conservation of the species. And so now that these have an assigned value, their populations are expanding. And we've done the same with bighorn sheep. Adam, you might be familiar with this, where the listeners may not. Bighorn sheep, you can't just go hunt bighorn sheep in the US. And they were not hunted out, by the way. They have mostly been done out by disease, by agriculture. There is a disease called brucellosis that sheep have, that especially captive sheep have, and they have spread this, and it is terminal. There is no cure. There's nothing we can do. We can't somehow go out and inoculate wild sheep. It doesn't work that way. And they die. And it can wipe out entire herds of sheep. And so without our support and without having these giant lotteries where the sheep tag in Oregon this last year was bought by a hunter from another state. I think it went for and this is listed on the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Games website. I think it was $345,000, $350,000 for one sheep tag, and all of that money goes back to science, conservation, biology, funding for those animals to support recovery and continued research on those animals. So is it great that there's one less sheep? Well, I suppose it depends. Can the biologists have determined that in this area or herd or whatever that there is a viable number and that they're okay and stable and that there isn't disease? So yes, it's okay. One could argue no, one's too many, but I would argue that the end result of an expanding population um, is always going to benefit. So that one unfortunately is sacrificed, but that the result is a betterment of that natural world, and again allows us all to now see them. Goats are the same way, things like that. In the state of Oregon, if you ever do draw a sheep or a goat tag, it's a once in a lifetime draw. Even if you don't kill an animal, you're done. You drew it. That was your tag. That was your shot. It's extremely rare. I'll probably never draw one. I always put in. It cost me a few dollars, but guess what? That dollars again every year that goes to conservation. So I look at that as another way that I am donating conservation, and hunters and anglers know that and do that. And beyond that, there's also, which we can dive into without tangenting too much, there's even excise taxes on pretty much everything that hunters and anglers buy. So there's other stuff as well.
Let's go there for before we go there, let's go to, I want to go back to something like that one less wild sheep in the world of the hunter or the forager, where life and death are a given, not something that can somehow be avoided if we just don't get involved. That one death is, in a sense, you're saying, is contributing to the survival of the species.
100%. It absolutely
which is a much
is.
bigger story than the one animal.
So death from death is
and
life,
if we
right?
allow ourselves, yeah. And it's a leap, I think, for some. It could be a leap for those of us that spend most of our time foraging in the grocery store, to see that there's, that life and death are given in the way that you've explained your experience, and that all of us are, in a way, we're part and parcel of the death and the rebirth of the species, of
I
the
I can't,
ecosystem, of life in general. Yeah. So I just want to kind of,
yeah, and I can't help,
as a moral investigation,
I
frame that.
can't help but, sorry, I keep interrupting you, Hannah, but I can't help because, of course, today we're in 2022. We're in, where are we? June, July, and all over the news is, of course, such a massive issue about the emotions around life and death at the moment. And
Yeah.
I'm I I I can't help in this conversation. Of course, it's not about this. This is about a human life, but I can't help but think the emotions, the responses to life and death, that somehow that's all connected into what we're talking about here. I don't know what the connection is, but yeah, it keeps on coming up.
No, I think you're 100% right, and I think another thing that's challenging for people is people don't want to have the idea that somehow, okay, that deer over there, Adam, is worth $5,000. Like, wait, what, why? And how did you come up with that amount? It's like, well, yeah, that's what it costs to when we charge for every deer, and we look at it as what we need for biology and state funding. That's a challenging thing to accept and even understand, right? I don't want to say, oh, look at that deer, it's worth blank amount. I don't when I'm hunting. I guarantee you I don't. But again, there is a value, right? When I'm every year I buy all my hunting licenses And I spend quite a bit of money because I'm hunting multiple states. And so when you hunt out of state, they charge you more, by the way, when you go to another state, because they basically say, well, hey, you're coming from out of state. You're taking from our resource in our state, which means potentially less for our people. So we're going to charge you more for that. And we're going to give you less opportunity, which I'm okay with. I mean, it is the nature of the system and it helps support these animals. And yeah, it's difficult for people to understand that. And I do think it dovetails, and I know that you and I were chatting about this, that a lot of the funding that supports programs, whether we're talking, Miriam, about human life or animal life, and I'm going to keep this to animal life because that's where my knowledge lays. A lot of the funding for things like this are in areas that people don't understand or don't know. They simply are unaware of it. And the information is out there, but I also don't blame people for not sitting there and going on their computer and spending 10 to 20 hours trying to dive down a rabbit hole and read some legal PDF that is dry as heck. And trust me, sometimes when I am doing some conservation work and maybe there's a bill that is being introduced and we have to sit there and try and read it because someone else is freaking out about it. And I go, I don't see the reason that this is going to inhibit or, hunting maybe that you do, but I have to sit there and read that line by line. And trust me, it's sometimes quite arduous. But as far as in this state, in Oregon, um, I would say about a third, actually slightly more than a third of all of the funding for kind of the budget for state biologists, state police that help with wildlife engagement. In Oregon, we don't have fish and game in the sense that some other states do. I think there's only two states that don't do that. I think it might be New Jersey, but we use our state police to patrol fish and game, whereas other states have a fish and game officer, just straight fish and game. They're not affiliated with the police at all. And our state police has a wildlife division. But all of that, the biologists, state police, uh, administration of hunting licenses and sales, public information, biologist fees, all of that, one third of that money is literally directly from hunting license sales. So when people say hunting's no longer necessary, if you removed that funding source, the state would go broke in those areas, or you would see such ridiculous raises in taxes. No one would be happy anyway. So I mean, the hunters are contributing all the time. We are paying tons of salaries, and the biologists often even say that they really that I've interacted with. They appreciate hunters because again, hunters are in there more than they are. They learn a ton from hunters. They may do flyovers, but then the hunters say, okay, well, you did that this time of the year. I am in there this time, this other month. Here's what I saw. And so they use that information and they go back in there at other times and they absolutely critically rely upon that. Or when a hunter turns in the teeth of an animal for aging and health. Okay, now we know age, class, sex, all these things, the overall health populations for a herd. And of course, that allows them then to adjust the regulations if a herd is kind of coming to a point where it's like, okay, we can't sustain as much, impact upon this herd. But also it might be, hey, this herd is doing well, or even going into areas we don't want it to. People don't think about that too. There's over in northeastern Oregon, there's the Nature Conservancy, which is a wonderful area which I encourage people to visit. Zumwalt Prairie, which I think is the last bunchgrass prairie in the United States. We are losing, by the way, plains and prairie lands in the United States faster than we are losing the Amazon rainforest, if people weren't aware of that, which is alarming. Um, there is a lot of life that happens out on the plain and prairie that people aren't aware of because it's not some cute little tree frog or something. Um, but so they have a lot of elk that roam that prairie, and they every year allow a certain number of hunters onto that prairie to hunt, especially actually cow elk, female elk. People kind of go like, "Wait, what are you doing? You're letting people on a nature preserve with a rifle." And what they do is they are not necessarily looking to reduce that herd. If you do, the numbers can withstand it. But what they really want is the hunters move the animals around. They don't stay in one place or dissolve all the bunch grass in one place. They disrupt the herd. And that is incredibly valuable to the prairie. So again, there's things that people don't think that hunters do when we are just in the woods. Just us, the act of being there, has a reactionary effect. Yeah, actually, well, that's an odd tangent. Just made me think. It reminds me a bit of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which you may or may not know, which essentially states that you can't either know the location or speed of something at the same time because it's always changing, and even the act of trying to measure that changes the input. And sort of, yeah, when I'm on the, if I'm a particle moving around that environment, I am changing everything around me, and so nothing is measurable. Everything is sort of uncertain. So yeah, that not only do hunters conserve in the sense of funding, but even in the sense of the way that we reallocate wildlife just by our presence on the environment.
That's super interesting. I didn't know. I know the that those animals are so important to the sustainability or continuity of those grasslands, but I didn't know the even think about the role that hunters or human disruption play in a positive way. Um, so you said, and I may be off on this, but you said that there's an excise tax on everything that goes along with hunting, besides the licenses. I'm assuming, which includes another hot topic, um, firearms, ammunition. I'm assuming archery equipment too.
Yep.
Um, what does that contribute to wildlife and wilderness conservation?
Yeah, so now you're getting into the Pittman-Robertson Act, which was two senators. I'm actually pulling it up because I don't want to get the information totally wrong. But the way that they do is that, in the past, again, a lot of these animals were driven down in numbers, actually not by uh, the family hunter. First off, just so again people realize that when we say hunting had an impact on animals, it wasn't John Smith and his family out hunting that created no more pronghorn. It was actually commercial hunting. Um, the methods used back then were very different. And yeah, they were giant. I mean, look, we can see this in the buffalo, right? So the Pittman-Robertson Act, it has an 11% tax on firearms, ammunition, archery equipment, and distributes the proceeds to state governments for wildlife projects. And that actually was, by the way, signed into law by Roosevelt. So you brought up Roosevelt. Um, so that basically then that is divvied up per state, on an equitable basis depending on each state's needs. So there is a lot of federal funding, absolutely, that goes into the state funding. I don't want to discount that and saying 1/3 of our funding is all in state, and it is, but another large portion comes from those excise taxes. That said, again, that's a national thing, and that's divided equally federally, depending on your state's needs, what kind of animals you have, the health of herds, things like that. And so that's divvied up by the federal government. And then again, that's also used. In fact, I would bet ODFW's website. Yeah, so their examples, for example, they say the federal funded programs are things like fish and wildlife biologists, again, fish hatcheries, fish and wildlife population survey and inventory, hunter and angler access. Oh, I forgot hunter and angler education. I did, and I should know that because we bring that up in my hunter ed class all the time. Bad hunter ed advisor there. So yeah, literally the classes to educate people on hunter safety are funded by Pittman-Robertson. So and I call it the dirty secret, but I call it, again, it's probably not the right word. The side secret to that is that for me, for as a hunter, what I recognize is that the casual shooter is contributing a ton to that, because there's probably more, I would bet, I don't know this for sure, casual firearm shooters who don't go hunt, right? Who might just go to the range or do matches or just like to shoot their handgun. All those people are paying an 11% excise tax, which still goes back to all those things. That's why there has been some question if there shouldn't be a backpackers tax, which of course many backpackers don't like, and certainly many organizations. What's more important is many powerful organizations in the clothing industry actually don't like, because they don't want to eliminate that portion of their own revenue or try and raise the prices, which again would eliminate some. Um, it's an interesting question because backpackers and hikers, absolutely, like going up the PCT and all that, they're absolutely impacting wildlife. Putting in new trails everywhere impacts wildlife. People going to Yellowstone and setting their baby on a bison impacts wildlife. By the way, that was a real story that happened. I think was it last year or this year? Someone actually tried to put their child on a bison and take a photo. I think they ended up fine, but very poor idea. Bad decisions all around on that one. So yeah, it is an interesting question if there should be a backpackers tax. But regardless of that, yeah. So the Pittman Robinson to go back. Sorry, I was tangenting. Definitely helps divide that between all the states, and every hunting piece of equipment, firearms, ammo, archery equipment, all those things, broadheads, bowstrings, bows, all that. That all goes into that. There's an 11% excise tax, whether you know it or not. You're paying it when you purchase something like that, shotgun, shot shell, and then there's other federal requirements, right? So, like for waterfowl, you have to shoot non-toxic. They call non-toxic or non-lead shot because it gets into the system too much, right? Because these animals get either eaten by other birds or the shot misses and goes into water systems, things of that nature. So there's a lot of conservation effort and a lot of money that is driven by this. But even beyond all that, another argument or postulation that's not tracked about hunting is the amount of dollars that we spend in the act itself. When I fill up my truck and I drive 22 hours and into, let's just say, Wyoming, and I stay in a hotel because it's a nasty weather, and I go next door and eat at Ma and Pa's burger joint, I am contributing to all of those economies. And there are absolutely smaller economies that rely upon these seasons when hunters and anglers, I've seen it with fishing too, visit during prime seasons to really give them a boost. And so if you removed all this, you would absolutely change the social economic position of those places. So it goes beyond just excise taxes and even license fees.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Just painting a bigger picture, I think bringing up these major kind of headline issues in the world and some of the things that we think about across the cultural divides. Just helping us remember the complexity. It's not just about the firearm. It's not just about the deer, the deer that gets brought home. It's a whole web, an
Oh
economic
yeah.
web, cultural web, a web of relationships, both modern and very ancient, human and non-human. And I think it's just a reminder that you brought to us today and to the people that are listening. The last thing I want to bring up is, BHA is about keeping access to public lands. And I was recently in Argentina visiting family, and just the idea that we have all of these public lands in I would say North America, but I'm going to say the United States because that's what I know the most. And some states like Oregon, we have, I think it's what, 50% of
Yeah,
the land
50 or
is public,
60. Yeah.
meaning state parks, uh, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, wilderness. There's all these different arrangements, but that these are our commons. These are places that we can camp for free very often, hike, fish, hunt, um, even forage and take other resources, sometimes with permits and sometimes not. Um, yeah, just can you talk a little bit about that and what that means for people that are not necessarily hunters, and what BHA is doing in that
Yeah.
regard?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I think I sort of glossed over it before, probably because I was excited by our other topics, and it's easy. I mean, I could spend hours just talking about BHA, and again, why I joined them. And I belong to several organizations, and I try and spread my conservation dollars as much as I am capable and possible to do so. Like I said, because again, not many people out there actually are just giving to save the mule deer. They're it just doesn't work that way, or maybe it's because it's right in our backyard. We don't think about it the same way as some other animal that might be even on another continent. But public lands, gosh, we mentioned public lands are reducing, or that they are being what they call landlocked, which is essentially it becomes all private land around it. And so your land, public land that we have a right to access, is no longer accessible, right? Because you would have to trespass on somebody's land. And so BHA, as well as other organizations, do a lot of work to find ways to find easements, which means creating a path with the landowner to that public land, or to even buying back certain areas of land to be able to now have access. A really good example of this that I encourage people in Oregon to look at, or even people who aren't, there was the Minim River purchase in Oregon recently, which Oregon Hunters Association, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Oregon BHA, there's probably others, and I apologize if I'm forgetting anyone, all put in to help purchase this land back. And with ODFW and other forestry groups, made this now an accessible public land area. And it opens millions of acres of land to recreate on. And that beyond hunting, that means that anyone can go out there and forage for morels if they're out there. Don't take my word on it. I don't know who they are. Don't go straight. If someone's like, "Oh my gosh," um, but whatever that might be, that allows now that opportunity to preserve that, right? And again, we also look at that as an opportunity to conserve the animals in that area, because now biologists can have a better sense of what's going on in that area. It's private land; they can't do a lot of information on. They can do flyover, but it's just not the same. We know that a lot of animals are on private land, um, but that doesn't necessarily help with the management of a herd. It doesn't also help when the landowner says, "I don't want these animals on my land," because they are consuming maybe their feed or something of that nature, or their crops. Um, so I did pull up really quickly on the web. I was going to pull up Oregon, see where it was on this list of how many acres, or how much percent was public land. Oh no, my thing's just going off. And we have a terrible abbreviation for our state because it just pulls up every or. So yeah, 60.4% of this state is public land, which actually puts us, it looks like, at number 5. Number 1 is Alaska. But so we have an incredible amount of public land. But that's not always the whole story. The challenge with public land, as I was mentioning, with the accessibility, is that a state like Wyoming, which has nearly 56% of public land, has the most landlocked public land in the nation. And I can't remember how many millions, I do mean millions of acres, literally people can't access. If you had a helicopter, you could get in there, right? So now it becomes like, do you have money? Because if you have money, you can get to that public land, but otherwise you can't. And so BHA and other organizations have really taken that notice of this, that as we grow, and our population swells, and these wild areas are shrunk into smaller and smaller pockets, and they get surrounded by these private land areas, that one, it creates obviously a drain on these resources just by impact, like we were talking about. And two, it creates a lack of opportunity to access them. And again, plug your finger into that and experience that. And so BHA and these other organizations, TRCP included, have really lobbied through politicians with bills, again, through buyback programs, through all sorts of things, to say, no, we want to create even a safety net around those natural areas, right? Yes, we want people to access them. We don't want them to be like in a bubble, in the far flung future, like looking at an elk through a glass window or something. We don't want that. We want an actual interaction. But to do that, we have to preserve large swaths of this public land, which again goes all the way back to what Teddy Roosevelt was saying when he founded all these national parks, right? And Aldo Leopold, and down the road, I think probably every president, I'm going to guess, at some point has made a national park after themselves, which is kind of funny and maybe egocentrical, but also good, because you are preserving a natural space, and recognizing that there is this value in not only in preserving that, but making sure that the public can plug into that, tap into that, and see why it's important to preserve it. So that's one of the reasons I really have an affinity with BHA as well. One interesting thing about BHA that I was chatting with a buddy about recently is that politically, because Adam, you were mentioning politically earlier, or maybe it was me, is very, very equal in its diversity of the spectrum, the political spectrum, left, right, and middle. It's almost an equal split all the way across. It's really, there's not a party that says, oh, we're this way or that way. I think that really shows, though, that it's an everyone issue, not one side, not political. That it is, and I encourage people to try and keep track of national legislation that's going on. In fact, you can go to Backcountry Hunters and Anglers website. There's a take action tracker, and on that, it shows the whole nation. It shows national ones, and you can click on individual states to see what's going on in each one. But a big one right now is what's called RAWA, a funny abbreviation for the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And I encourage everyone to tell your senators and representatives, support this. It will absolutely pour tons of money into the protection of endangered species, towards their recovery, as well as towards science-based evidentiary kind of introspection by biologists to understand what's going on in the environment. So that's right now has bipartisan support. There's a few things holding it up, so I encourage you just to keep going after it. One that passed a while back was the Great American Outdoors Act. That one went through, thank goodness. And so people, celebrated that. And, you can look these things up to get more details. I don't want to have to go down a litany of what they are. Again, it can get a bit dry if I just read the text to you. But just know that these things are all in the benefit of all of us, to keep that wild world wild, but also accessible. And I think there's a key there and a balance, right? To keep it wild, but accessible. And if we lose that accessibility, we still lose out. We aren't just preserving something, putting something up on a shelf doesn't allow you to understand it, doesn't allow you to interact with it. You can look at that cool thing, but then it's made movies about. Then it's Jurassic Park. It's not real. We lose that viability to it. So.
Miriam, do you want to chime in, and then we'll wrap it? Okay. First of all, it's nice to know that there are some. So it's June 24th, 2022 that we're recording this, and with so much divisive stuff that's happened in the last week in the United States politically, to end this podcast, this conversation, thinking about something that unites us all in this country and around the world, our connection with nature, with the natural world, and the benefits that come from being able to access it and access it freely, or maybe through our tax dollars, but access it equally, is heartening to remember that that's still one place that we all share as human beings, as a place of sustenance, of healing, of recreation, of connection. So, and thank you, Joel, for taking us through this journey from your own. I'm going to use this word, take it or leave it, heartfelt experience of becoming a hunter, and the relationship that you've cultivated with the world through that, and other people, all the way through to what you're helping to contribute and give back, to the resources that even non-hunters and non-fisher people get to take part in. So thank you.
I really appreciate you having me on, and I really appreciate that. I'm sorry.
Any parting words?
I was just going to say, I just really
any
appreciate
parting words for the.
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate you having me on, and I encourage everyone to try and understand what's going on around them. Right? I mean, we talked about being muted, right, and being removed from it, and that's easy to do. I'm not saying anyone's bad or good, or there's no judgment on any of this. But yeah, I think it's important to connect, even if it's going to a local duck pond and seeing the ducks and trying to understand what species of duck they are. I mean, I think that's cool. I think there's value to that, and just appreciating that, and knowing that there are groups out there that are working their tails off to make sure that these wild things and wild spaces last, quite honestly, forever. And while we may interact with them in a way that some people don't wish to, or some people might even find distasteful, that doesn't devalue the heartfelt appreciation and love we have for those spaces and things, that we all equally love it. We just have a different way of interacting with it. And we on the hunting and angling aspect perhaps are more tied to it simply because we are always in it. And so for us, it's more than just seeing it. It's quite literally part of our lives. And so I just encourage everyone to get out, enjoy, use your public lands, know what's going on, but also think very critically about your world around you, and just use that with that scope and lens.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.